This is Chiming In. So within 24 hours, I've gone from my answer machine flickering to sitting in front of James Packer. And at the time I'm talking to James, Lachlan Murdoch rang me.
Jared Mullen, Danny Wicks, Jack DeBellin.
Yeah. From experience, I'll say to him, listen, I've heard everything. You can't tell me something I haven't heard. I'm here to help you. You need to tell me everything. And if they do, there's a good chance you can help them. Mate, I've got the lawyers on speed dial. I've got the mental health workers on speed dial. Plenty of bad days, mate. Bad days are when they get into trouble or go to jail or have problems with drugs or alcohol. They're the days that hurt the most.
Steve Chimes Gillis, welcome to Chiming In.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Mate, I've sat opposite you for now about 6 episodes, and I've been amazed you don't have notes when you're talking to your guests.
I don't know if it's a skill. I guess I know the guests reasonably well or quite well, which helps. I also do a bit of thinking before each show's recorded.
Okay, so I've got notes, but I have thought about it.
Good, I'm sure you have.
Mate, before we start, a lot of people have said to me, Chimes, where's that nickname come from?
Well, I played rugby when I was a kid, league and union, but played rugby, and my coach, I was playing fullback at the time, and I used to come into the back line, not super fast, but I used to chime into the back line, but coach used to say, you got to let your centres know when you're coming in. So I used to scream out at the top of my voice, I'm chiming in, I'm chiming in. And coach pulled me aside, he said, can you stop yelling out what you're doing? So it stuck after that. They abbreviated and called me Chime.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
You can imagine I was very good at it.
I can imagine, yeah. Mate, tell me about your childhood,
Grew up in Randwick, large family of 7 kids, mum and dad, working class family. Went to Morris Brothers at Randwick, which was obviously a boys' school. Played a bit of footy, played league and union, was in the surf club. Same upbringing as a lot of people in those days. You go to school, you come home, you go out and play and kick the footy around till the street lights come on.
Were you any good at footy?
I wasn't brave enough. Good friend of mine, Joe Thomas, who won a premiership with the Bulldogs, played in our team at school. And occasionally, if we're having a beer, I'll say to Joe, tell him how good I was at footy. And Joe says the best way to describe Stephen was he was busy. And that was it. I was busy. Not
very good.
Good defence, nothing, just busy. I took it as a rap.
Yeah, okay. What about at school? How were you at school?
Pretty good at school in the early days. I struggled in year 12. I failed the HSC, failed everything, failed English. My best subject was geology, which is the study of rocks, which set me up for a bright future. Whatever I was going to do, I wasn't sure.
And did you fail because you got diverted? Someone diverted your attention, or what was that?
Yeah, year 12, I had a mate, Stuart Crow, who was a bit of a mentor to me back in the early days. He was in the surf club with us. And in year 12, instead of going to the library at night, he'd take me to illegal gambling casinos in Bondi Junction. So probably 2 nights a week, I'd end up in a casino with him and his mate Barry Bunt until 1 or 2 in the morning. So it probably wasn't the best prep to march out in HSC.
You would have been good at maths, though, counting numbers. I
could count to 21. I was pretty good at that. But, yeah, probably some time wasted. If I'd sat in the library and studied a bit harder, I might have done a lot better.
So you're betting your own money?
Yeah, I worked 2 jobs back then. So I might only take $10 or $15. On a big night, I might have $20. But you'd get free drinks, free toasted sandwiches, and it was a pretty exciting little adventure every time we went. So, and occasionally you'd win.
So was there one of those in each town? Like illegal casinos?
There were a lot of them in Sydney at the time.
Yeah, wow.
So they were scattered right throughout Sydney, but there were a few in the eastern suburbs. A lot of interesting characters would get there. There were trotting drivers and lots of interesting and exciting times.
So for somebody who struggled at school, how did you get into journalism?
In year 12, when I was in year 12, in about May, a friend of mine, Richard Sleeman, who I'd expressed an interest in becoming a journalist because he was a high-profile sports writer at the time, he invited me into News Limited for a look around one Saturday. which I went in and I met the guy who was in charge of employing the copy kids. So he took all my details in May and said to me, if you do well in your HSC and get a good pass in English, well, there might be a job here for you. So I heard from him again in November that year. The first day I went into the paper in May, the races were on the radio, footy was on the television, blokes were walking around in shorts and thongs.
How good.
That was unbelievable.
Perfect.
And then they took me down to the pub, the Evening Star, which is about 50 metres from the front door there. Had about 6 middies, and I just thought to myself, I've got to do this. I was 17.
17,
I said,
drinking middies.
This is the life for me. Anyway, in November, I just finished my last exam, my very last exam, the HSC, and the phone rang at home, and it was the guy that I'd spoken to from News Limited the previous May. His name was Ross Hyam, a good fella. And he said to me, hey, mate, a job's come up, and I'd like you to start. And I said, Ross, I'm going on schoolies tomorrow. I'm away for 2 weeks, but I'll catch you when I get back. I look forward to it. And he said, no. He said, you need to start tonight at midnight in the police radio room, monitoring the radios for the journalists. And he said, if you can't start tonight, he said, I've got a list of 10 people. He said, I'll just ring someone else. They can have the job. And I said, yeah, but I'm going away. And he said, it's take it or leave it. So I was in there at 11:45 that night. I tore up my boarding pass to schoolies and started. But he said to me when I started, he said, mate, you need to understand if you don't get a good pass in English and pass the HSC, when your results come out in January, I'll be letting you go. I said, not a problem, mate. I said, I've blitzed it. I said, we'll be right.
Very good.
So January rolled around, and it was the day that everyone was opening their results. They'd get mailed to your home. And a lot of the people I was working with were ringing home, getting their parents to open their results. And Ross came out and saw me, and he said, oh, look, everyone's getting their results. Are you going to get yours? I said, no, I'll do it when I get home, mate. I said, I did the exams. I'm the one who should be opening. One of the girls in there rang a mother. HSC was out of 500 back then, and she burst into tears. Her mother had opened her results, and she started crying hysterically. And I said, what's the matter? And she said, oh, I've blown it. I've messed it up. She said, I've made an absolute mess of it. And I said, what'd you get? And she said, 472 out of 500. I said, oh, geez, you have made a mess of that. So everyone was getting their results and everyone was passing. And I got home that night and opened my results. I got 200 out of 500, which was a fail. I think I got about 30 for English, and geology 43 out of 100. I failed religion. I failed everything.
No one fails religion, though.
No, I failed it. I was consistent. Anyway.
So, mate, how does that make you feel? I mean, were you failing your HSC, was it a big deal to you?
It was pretty crushing at the time because I'd done the trials probably 6 weeks earlier and probably got in the low threes. So I did all right. So I was just run off the track late,
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, but
I think sometimes when when you're a young fella and you think you're going all right,
yeah,
and you kind of get a bit big for your boots. I mean, I did that as well, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of lose control of where you are. And I think that's guys rather than girls necessarily.
Yeah, I didn't read books. I didn't study.
Cheat notes, crib notes?
Yeah, cheat notes, the shorts.
Yeah.
So, I paid the price for not working hard enough. I'd love to be able to go back in time and do it again with what you know in life, because I reckon I would have done all right.
No shortcuts in life, right?
No, there's no shortcuts. There's a lot of luck, but no shortcuts. You've got to roll up your sleeves and have a dig. Yeah.
So, mate, tell me about those early days at News Limited. I mean, the Evening Star, was kind of where everybody used to hang out. What was it like day to day for you in those days?
It was a very exciting place to work. There were, there were a lot of famous people working there. Mike Munro worked there.
Yeah.
Bill Morty was in there. I mean, they were well-known characters. So it was very, very exciting. Every day you go in there, you'd be excited to see things. It's a bit like in the TV shows when they show newsrooms and that. It's hustle and bustle. It's vibrant. It's good.
So how does that work out, hierarchy? Who gets the stories? Do you break your own stories? Do you get given stories? As a young cadet, you probably don't.
Yeah, as a cadet, depends what round you're on. So I worked in all rounds. So I did state parliament, courts, police rounds, finance, sport, and general. So I did them all. State parliament was easy because they'd put these press releases in your pigeonhole, and the quotes would be there. So you basically just have to type a top on the story and use their quotes and find an angle to beef it up a bit. But sport was good but competitive because there'd be other journalists there above you that would have right of way with a lot of the stories. But it was just a matter of getting in there, having an inquiry mind, working hard and chasing.
So, mate, what happened? You're working there, but you failed your HSC.
Yeah.
They never followed it up, obviously.
Well, the guy that I worked with, when I failed, he came to see me the next day and he said, I need to see your results. We've got a deal. And I said, mate, look, I've done so good. I said, Mum and Dad, we had a big dinner last night. I said, Mum's taken around to my grandmother's this morning. I said, I'll bring him in tomorrow. He said, make sure you do because we've got a deal. And if you haven't passed, you're out the door. So I come in the next day and he grabbed me again. And I said, my grandmother's so thrilled. She's given them to my auntie. So then he said to me, mate, if they're not here Monday, he said, don't come in. And all weekend I've been cutting out little numbers from papers, trying to glue them onto the results sheet, and they were falling off and the glue was smudging on the thing. And I said to myself, I'm going to go in Monday and own up and tell him that I'm a failure, And I went in Monday. I went into his office first thing, and because I was working the day shift then in January, and there was a guy sitting in his seat, in his desk, and I said, g'day, Jeff. I said, where's Ross? He said, he's got glandular fever. He's going to be off for 3 or 4 months. I said, that's terrible. Anyway, I said, I'll just head out the newsroom. He said, yeah, off you go. Good on you, mate. And so Ross was off for about 3.5 months. And during that time, I'd worked really hard. And I had about 30 stories published in the paper, and I got to know all the staff. And I didn't have a day off, and I was reliable, and they could see that I had some potential. And Ross came back, and he grabbed me when he got me. I said, "Jesus, good to see you, mate. You're looking good. You lost a bit of weight too. You look fantastic." And he said, "Listen here." And he said, "I've done some checking, and they're happy with you." He said, "Personally, I don't think you're ever going to make it." He said, "But if you want to keep going, I'll let you keep going." I said, "Oh, thank you, Ross." So back out I went. Yeah,
great story.
Yeah, so I ended up getting the lunches and that for the journalists for nearly 2 years. 2 years running around, get kicked in the bum. But it was good training. You learn a lot.
So, mate, tell me about those early days reporting rugby league, 80s, 90s.
Yeah, a lot of fun. You used to get a game to go to each week. I went to a lot of Canberra games in the early days because they weren't much good, and a lot of the journos didn't want to have to get on a plane and fly down there. And generally had to stay the night and come back the next day because the flights, you couldn't get a flight out a lot of the time.
In those days, most games were on the same day, right?
A lot of Sunday games, yeah.
They were all on Sunday at 3 o'clock, and you used to listen to the radio at halftime to get the updates. And crazy.
So, you'd have teams night, you'd have injury stories, you'd have newsy or lifestyle type stories, and you'd have game day, which was great fun. I used to love going to the footy, and then you go to the dressing rooms, and you'd talk to the coaches, then you'd talk to the players, then you'd write your story. It was a lot of fun. So
you're not really very different to today's where, we're talking about DCE moving, players moving all the time, those kind of things, right?
Yeah, there's no social media back then. No, mobile phones had only just started, and they were like a house brick. But yeah, it was slower. It was good, but different.
So, mate, did you have contacts for scoops and stuff? I mean, how did that work? I mean, what was the hierarchy between the different journos? I mean, did you have particular guys you went to?
You'd have to build your relationships with the players and the clubs. Certainly in the early days when a young league reporter came on the scene, he had to earn his stripes. You wouldn't always get to talk to the general manager of the game or the CEO of the club. You'd be pretty much a bottom feeder, but you're still learning your trade as you're going and making contacts and meeting people and meeting players and earning their trust. And then you'd gradually gain credibility by having your stories published and reporting fairly, but working hard. Yeah.
And you spent a bit of time with the Continuous Call team back then?
Yeah, I did the radio with Ray Hadley and the Continuous Call team at 2UE and 2GB. So that was good fun. You get on there on a Sunday and give the scores from around the grounds and do previews and reviews and occasionally interview people for the radio. So it was exciting. It was good.
I remember sideline eye Tony McGay. Remember that?
Good man, Magoo.
Was he? Yeah, knew him well.
Yeah. No, they were all good people, and it was a lot of fun. It was something different. I used to read the sport on 2UE at 6, starting at 6 in the morning on Saturdays. I'd do a shift on a Saturday, and I used to get in there dusty sometimes from Friday nights. And I do 10 minutes with Gary O'Callaghan at 5:30, just talking about what's on in sport that day. And he was a legend of radio, so just things like that. It was a huge buzz, yeah.
And so then you left News pretty much overnight, right, to go to Rugby League Week?
Yeah, I left in 1993. I asked for a pay rise and they didn't give it to me. So I said to the boss at the time, I've got some holidays. I'd like to take me 9 weeks holidays. And he said, I can't let you take your holidays. I said, you won't pay me more and you won't let me take my holidays. I said, I think I'll quit. And he said, good on you. And that was it. He middle stumped me.
Not thinking you would, or
no,
hoping you would?
I didn't think he'd say, off you go.
Yeah, wow.
I thought he'd say, it was a little negotiation earlier. I thought he would have said, well, look, we'll try and work something out. He said, off you go. See you later.
Wow.
And I said, wow. So I had a job a week later at Rugby League Week, which is the best job. I enjoyed it more than being at News Limited because I was a senior reporter, respected by the staff, got the opportunity to write features and stuff like that, which I hadn't done before. And I continued the radio work too. So I was doing quite well. It was a lot more money too. So
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mate, tell me about Rugby League Week in those days, because there was Big League, obviously, which came out on I think on the Saturday or something, and had the
after
teams.
The teams were announced, the Big League, and then League Week. I think we came out on a Wednesday, but we go to print on a Monday, and it hit the stands on a Wednesday. But it was called the Bible. It was had some great journalists work for it. Ian Heads was there for a number of years, so it had integrity. It wasn't a rag. It was a glossy magazine that had great reporters, and they covered things in a lot more detail than some of the newspapers could do, because they had a bit more time to prepare that a week to put the magazine together.
Were you around when the Immortals concept came up?
Yeah, I was around at that time, and they owned that then, which was a huge flagship for them, because it gave them massive credibility. So they were the ones who instigated the birth of the Immortals, and I think it's run by the Game now.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it was good concept.
So, mate, you were at Rugby League Week for how long?
I was only there for about 12 months.
And then what happened?
Well, I was working on one Monday morning, my phone rang. It was about 9 o'clock, and the guy on the other end of the phone, he said, is that Steve Gillis? I said, yeah, it sure is. He said, you don't know me. He said, but I'm a rugby league player, and I have a meeting with Parramatta tomorrow. He said, my name is Keith Blackett. I'm from Bathurst. And I said, hello, Keith. How are you? He said, good. He said, the reason I'm ringing you is because I'm meeting Dennis Fitzgerald at midday tomorrow, and I need a manager. And I've decided that you are going to be my manager. And I'd never met this bloke before. And I hadn't even really thought about being an agent, because I just wasn't ready. I mean, I knew a lot of the players and that, but I just didn't think that it was the right time for me.
You're a journo, right?
Yeah, I was a journo. There would have been a conflict. I couldn't have written a story about a player and then taken him in to see the CEO. So I said to Keith, look, Keith, I appreciate your call. He said, have you heard of Wally Lewis? I said, I have. I said, I have. He said, I reckon I'm going to be as good as Wally Lewis.
Wow.
Keith is a character. And I said, Keith, I can't help you, mate. I said, I'll give you the numbers of 3 agents that I know, and someone I'm sure will help you, especially if you're going to be as good as Wally Lewis. So I gave him 3 numbers, and next day I'm in at work, 9 o'clock, the phone rings. He said, is that Steve Gillis? I said, yes, it is. He said, mate, it's Keith Blackett from Bathurst. I rang you yesterday. I said, yes, Keith, I do remember the call. I can go back one day normally. He said, those 3 names, you give me those managers. He said, one never returned me call. One said he couldn't help me, and one basically called me a Neville. He said, I had no chance. He said, I've got a meeting today at midday. My career is on the line before it starts. He said, I need you. And I started laughing. I said, Keith, I can't help you. I said, there'd be a conflict. And then he started screaming down the phone. He said, my life's on the line. No one gives a stuff about me. No one wants to help me. Anyway, I said to him, look, Keith, I'll come out with you. All right. So I left work, met him at Parramatta train station. We went and saw Dennis Fitzgerald, and he started laughing at me, saying, "Yeah, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm helping Keith out. I'm thinking about managing footballers." And he said, "How many you got?" And I looked at Keith. I said, "Keith," and he started laughing. So anyway, because Dennis was a good bloke and we knew each other because of my background in sports writing, and I guess because he liked me, he gave me an audience. So I've gone back to work that afternoon and went into the editor's office, and I said to Norm Tasker at the time, I said, "Norm, I've got to be honest with you, I snuck out today to Parramatta, to see Dennis Fitzgerald." And he said, "Mate, that's fantastic." He said, "I like it when you get out and meet the clubs and do some digging." Yeah. And I said, "Well, I went out there for myself, mate." I said, "I went out there to represent a footballer." He said, "Who?" I said, "Oh, his name's Keith Blackett." He said, "Who?" I said, "No, Keith Blackett. He's from Bathurst. He's going to be as good as Wally Lewis." Anyway, he looked at it. I said, "Mate, I'm going to have to resign." I said, I'm going to manage footballers." And he started laughing at me. He looked at me and he said, "Oh, mate, if that's what you want to do your best." So within 48 hours, after being in the happiest place I'd ever been in my life, working as a senior journalist and getting paid well, I quit for Keithy Blackett from Bathurst, who later did a deal at Parra, played over 50 first-grade games at Parra and the Gold Coast. Great fella, tough defender.
Better than Wally?
Didn't quite get to those heights. Didn't quite get there, but good bloke. And if he hadn't chose to ring me randomly back then, I doubt I would have ever delved into sports management.
So, mate, how do you go from one client, Keith Blackett, to 2 to 3 to 4? How's that?
Yeah, well, I was the talk of the town, mate. So I, the very next day after I quit, the next morning, I rang Phil Rothfield at the Telegraph because I'd worked there with Buzz and all those guys, Paul Kent and Dean Rich. I knew them all. And I said, "Hey, Buzz, I don't know if you know it or not," because he had the What's the Buzz column. So I needed to self-promote. I said, "I don't know if you know it or not." I said, "But I'm managing footballers. I've quit." And he said, "Oh, of course I know it." He said, "You're the talk of the town." He said, Everyone can't believe how stupid you are, And I said, "I need your help. I need you to put an article in the paper, in your column on Sunday, saying that I've quit journalism. I'm going to manage footballers. So I need to get some players interested in coming with me." He said, "Leave it with me, mate." He said, "I'll look after you." So I'm very excited that the next Sunday I'm going to be in the paper. Anyway, in the meantime, I rang Keith, to check in on my number one client. "Hey, Keith, how you going?" "Good." "What are you doing?" "Not much." "Okay, mate, have a good day." Right, put the phone down because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. There was nothing to do for him. I wasn't. He wasn't in a position to attract sponsors. He hadn't played NRL. He was just a minnow. So Sunday comes out looking for this article, which I thought was going to be a huge story that
front page.
The rookie had gone in to take on the big fish. And there it is, left-hand column, 4 items down, and it says Steve Gillis has quit journalism to take up sports management, with his first signing being Keith Blackett from Bathurst. That was it. Right? Well, my phone started ringing, but not the way I wanted it to, because everyone started ringing and gigging me, saying, "You're an idiot, and what have you done, and who's Keith Blackett?" And all like, I would have got 50 calls, and I'm thinking that's not good. I need to get out and find some players, So a week later, I'm at North Sydney Oval. The Bears playing Canberra, and I'd covered all those Canberra games in my early days, so I knew pretty much all the Raiders players. And we're at the pub after the game, and Laurie Daly and Kevin Neal came up to me, and Kevin was the CEO, and Laurie at the time was the best player in the world, or as good as anyone in the world.
Yeah, number one, right.
And Laurie came up to me, he said, "Hey, Chimes," he said, how's Keithy Blackett going?" I said, "Oh, Laurie." I said, "Mate, I've had 100 Keith Blackett jokes." I said, "I can't take any more." He said, "Would you like to manage me?" And I said, "Oh, another Keithy Blackett. That's not, Laurie, I can't take it. I can't handle it." And he said, "Mate, I'm serious." He said, "I don't have an agent." And Kevin Neal was kind enough to endorse me at the same time to Laurie. He said, "He'd be good, So I said, "Are you serious?" He said, I don't have a manager." He said, "If you want to have a crack at it, I'd love to let you have a go." Now, I knew Laurie well back then, but we weren't great mates, and I'm indebted to him forever for gambling on me. We've been very, very close ever since, and I still represent him today.
He was your number 2 client, the best player in the world.
Yeah, behind the great Keith Blackett, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So I rang Rothfield straight on the phone. It was Saturday afternoon. I said, hey, you got any room in your column tomorrow for an item? He said, always got room for good items, Steve. I said, Phil, I've just signed my second player. He said, oh, who? I said, I'll put him on. So Laurie jumped on the phone. He said, g'day, Buzz. He said, who's that? He said, it's Loz. He said, well, what are you doing? And Loz said, Chimes is going to manage me. I've just told him he can do it, and I want him to have a crack. I said, give me the phone back. So I said to Rothfield, I said, put that in your column, Phil, and I hung up. Anyway, the paper comes out the next day. I didn't sleep that night. I was so excited.
So, of course.
Oh, I'm thinking page 1.
Yeah.
1 week into the job, and I've got the best player in the world. Anyway,
went down the newsagents early to get the paper.
The first light, I'm down the newsagent, and I open up. It's page 1 not there. Page 1 of sport not there, because it was a big story.
Yeah.
1 week, I've snared the best player. Anyway, there's his column, same place, left-hand column, 4 items down. It said, the world's best player, Laurie Daly, has joined Steve Gillis's new sports management team as his number 2 client behind the great Keith Blackett from Bathurst. That's what he wrote. But then my phone started ringing.
Yeah,
and
wow.
people saying, you looking after Loz? Yeah, he said, oh, come and see me. I want to talk to you. So I was very lucky, right place, right time. And as I said, without Laurie's endorsement, I may not have flown at all, because I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Fantastic. Mate, soon after that was, Super League, which tore the game apart. I mean, you were there.
Yeah.
Run me through that when that first broke.
Mate, it was frantic times. And I probably had about 30 clients when Super League began, which was and established like players, like quality footballers.
So how long after that, after you became an agent, did that break?
Probably a bit over a year.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was after the 94 Kangaroo Tour. There were murmurs on that tour that something was going to happen. I remember...
Did you go on that tour?
Yeah, I toured, yeah. I didn't play, but I spent a few... I went as a stowaway. I went and stayed in the NRL's medical room, which Jeff Carr was the team manager, and I didn't want him knowing that I was a stowaway because I was travelling for free, see? And so I used to stay in the medical room. Nathan Gibbs was the doctor, and all their medical gear was in this room, and there's boxes and boxes of stuff, strapping and needles and whatever they needed, So I used to stay there at night and then disappear during the day, so no one would know. But there's a funny story. I told Ricky Stewart and Dean Pay, they were rooming together. And I said, they said, where are you staying? I said, I'm in the medical room. No one's to know. Because I was really gun shy. I didn't want to get caught. I didn't want to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it was the second night I was in there. 3 a.m, the phone rings. And this bloke goes, hello. He said, it's hotel security here. He said, you know you shouldn't be in that room, don't you? And I've gone, oh, jeez. They've nailed me. They've got me.
Yeah.
I said, oh, what? He said, listen here. He said, I can get the police to come up and get you. He said, or you can come down to reception straight away and see me. He said, you got 1 minute. So I get up and I'm in my pajamas and I press left and I go downstairs and I go up and there's the girl behind the jump there. I said, I've got to see hotel security. And she said, we don't have any on tonight. And I knew then that the boys had got me. So they're leaning over the balcony as I'm down there. In your
jammies.
It's 3 a.m.
They just got home.
Yeah, they give it to me. But Ricky's got me a couple of times. He's been naughty a couple of times to me, but I try not to let him know that he's got the better of me.
Very good.
Shake yourself off and keep going.
So you come back from that.
Yeah.
Well, how long was that? 8 weeks or something?
Yeah, I was away probably
8 weeks as a
10
stowaway,
weeks.
and then Super League hits.
Yeah, hits soon after that.
So how's that?
12 months. Yeah, it was crazy, mate, and it was, the game was torn apart. The phone, the battery on the phone couldn't keep up. It rang. If you hang up, it rang.
Really?
Yeah, it was just constant.
You would have one of those
all day.
big bricks then,
Yeah,
too.
I had a solid thing, yeah. And look, a lot of my players and Wayne Beavis's players and Sam Ayu's players were affiliated with ARL aligned clubs, so clubs like the Roosters and the Bears and Souths and those types of clubs.
Kind of foundation clubs.
Yeah, so we did a lot more deals with the ARL at the time. And Super League used to say we were ARL aligned, but I was just in there, A, to look after my clients, whichever comp they wanted to go to. I didn't lecture them on where they should play, and B, getting the right deal for them. You know?
So just on that with Beavis and Ayub, and what was that relationship between you guys? Was there trust there, or were you working together or against?
No, we were individuals at the time, but after that, the same lawyer that we used, Keith Bagley, who was a great fella, he suggested, look, why don't you set up a super business? Because if I've got to go to Manly, I can go over and do their work for them at the same time, which saves time and resources. So we created a new business in about shortly after Super League. We worked out at Rose Hill, and we stayed there, I think, as a group, a company called All Sports International. Alan Gainey came on board with us. We're out there, probably 10 years, I think, together.
Yeah, wow.
Never had a blue, but at the end of the day, the company split up. We all went our separate ways.
So, mate, just go back a little bit to that first murmur of Super League, and kind of how it came on, because there's a famous story about you with Adam Ritson, and him people not really knowing about Super League, and them kind of almost forcing this contract onto him.
Yeah, so I guess I was at the forefront as much as anyone, because I represented Adam, who I think was about 18 at the time and playing NRL. He debuted at age 16, so he was a superstar. And his team was in Perth that night, I think.
Cronulla.
Cronulla. I think it was a Friday or a Saturday night. And I got home and I had my message machine, the light had lit up. So I started playing the messages, and I had a message from Adam saying, ring me urgently, ring me urgently. And then I had a message from Shane Richardson, who was the CEO of Cronulla, saying, Chimes, we've all just signed with Super League. It's the first I've heard of it. So
never heard of Super League before?
No, not that it had been born until that.
Wow.
That message, yeah. He said, we've all just signed with Super League. I'm going, what? Who? What? Anyway, and then he's gone, Rido's signed as well, and everyone's happy. He said, give me a ring. So when I finally got onto him, I said, mate, what's going on? And he said, well, actually, Adam's signed his contract, but he made us write a clause in that if you weren't happy with it, we could tear it up. And then I got hold of Adam. And he said, mate, I've got a check here for 25 grand. He said, I want to go to the casino and cash it and attack. So don't you dare. We might need that to get you out. So I had no idea there was going to be an ARL fight back or anything at the time. But Adam and I just decided, until we knew what was really happening, that we were going to take our time. So within 24 hours, Adam flew back. Him and his parents met me at the airport. We sat down, we talked, and they said, what's going on? I said, I've got no idea, but we need to talk. So I ended up meeting James Packer later that day at his place at Bondi, and I got a leg up there through David Gingell, who's a mate of mine who obviously was great mates with James. And so within 24 hours, I've gone from my answering machine flickering to sitting in front of James Packer, and at the time I'm talking to James. Lachlan Murdoch rang me, and James was saying, hang up,
So, for people, James was ARL, and Lachlan was Super League.
Yeah, and Lachlan ran the News Limited Super League part of it. So we made a decision that Adam would stay with the ARL.
Was that purely financial, or how do you make that decision?
Oh, he got a cracking deal.
Yeah.
But he had the ability to negotiate his deal because he insisted on that clause. Everyone who signed in Perth that night, I'm sure, were getting a lot more money than they had previously, but they didn't have the advantage of saying, well, how much are you going to give me?
Leverage.
Yeah. So
incredible foresight from an 18-year-old kid.
It's just the type of bloke that he is.
Yeah, wow.
Amazing kid, and good friend to this day. So I had to take his check back. Malcolm Node rang me when I had to ring him. He was part of New Zealand at the time. He ended up CEO of the Bulldogs.
Mm.
And he said, you got to take that cheque back. I said, I took it back last night, left it at reception. I wrote a note to Malcolm, who was a lovely bloke.
Mm.
I said, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing here. I said, but Adam's decided to stay with the ARL. Thanks for your interest in him.
Unbelievable.
And had to hand that cheque
25 grand, which would have been a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot of mone to him back then.
So, mate, so what happened then? So you're in meetings with Packer, you're in meetings with Murdoch.
Yeah, it was a scramble-a-thon, frantic.
Whoever could get the most players.
Yeah. They would
whatever it cost.
Yeah, because it wasn't very well thought out. They knew if they could sign 3 or 4 clubs that the ARL would most likely fold, and then they could take their time.
Wow.
So it was strategically done. But John Rebo has said in hindsight, he said, we should have signed with the agents, not the clubs, because they had control of the
players.
Yeah.
And so, were you travelling around? I mean, did you go and see teams?
Went. I was on a famous trip to Newcastle in the middle of the night in the early days. Phil Gould, Wayne Beavis, and I drove up there. I was looking after a young fella named Nathan Barnes, who went on to play for Parramatta, and so I had to talk to him about what he wanted to do because Newcastle hadn't made a decision. And Gus went up there to address the players, and Gus, in his way, gave this Churchillian type speech and convinced the players that they should stick together and stick with the ARL.
Unbelievable.
They did, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, they all got paid well, but Newcastle was a huge part of the jigsaw because if they'd lost Newcastle, I think the ARL may have folded. And Adam Ritson was the first player to come back or to announce that he was committing. So a lot of people say to this day that was pivotal in the ARL survival.
Well, also, you never would have known about Super League, right?
That's right.
You would have had no idea, and they would have signed more clubs. And phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, mate, tell me about some highs and lows, like, day to day, doing stuff like that's unbelievable, right? I mean, Super League, but that doesn't come around, thankfully, very often.
Yeah.
Like, what's a good day and what's a bad day look like?
Good day is someone like Sammy Verrills, who played his juniors at Manly and they didn't have a future for him, didn't think he was going to get there. So we got him a start at the Roosters, and a few years later he's playing in a grand final, winning a grand final, scoring a try in a grand final. They're beautiful days, Good days are when players make their debut, and they've been with you since they're 15 or 16, and you've helped steer them to their first grade debut. Plenty of bad days, mate. Bad days are when they get into trouble or go to jail or have problems with drugs or alcohol. They're the days that hurt the most.
Mate, tell me about that because, obviously in recent days or recent years, you've had Jared Mullen, Danny Wicks, Jack DeBellin, Finchy. You've had a fair share of blokes who've gone through some difficult times. I mean, every time I turn on the TV, you're there in court with them, right? So you turn up and it's part of your life. But
I had a good run for a long time
without trouble,
and I had a real good run. And then
who broke that?
Terrible trot. Probably Mullo or Paul
Friendy,
Carter
maybe
or
Friendy.
Jake Friend got in a bit of trouble. But and then when you get 3 or 4 or 5 at once, and you're trying to, manage your business, manage your life and kids,
family,
and keep turning up, it can be incredibly taxing. But you just got to keep going. You got to have good people around you that can support you and support those players, and you've just got to keep going. So you're a bit of an ambulance driver, you're a bit of a pseudo lawyer, you're a bit of a counsellor, a life coach, but you just got to keep going. I could understand if it was too tough for some, because some of the stuff, and I don't want to sound like a win, but some of the stuff that we've been through with these players has been incredibly taxing. Yeah. But I'm still here,
You're still here?
Yeah.
You're looking good too.
Yeah, I'm an athlete.
Yeah. Mate, what's that first call like? You you're in bed, you're relaxing, and
Yeah.
maybe have your sleep apnea mask on.
Yeah, no, I don't. I need something.
Okay. I was just thinking a big man. What's that like? What's that when you get your first?
You get used to it.
Really?
Yeah. Sadly, you do. You know.
Expect it.
Oh, you can tell. You can tell. You know, I often when the guys ring, I say, "Oh, tell me you're not in jail," just as a G up.
Wow.
You know, just to break the ice. But you can tell pretty quick that the key to it is, you know, I would try and meet with them as soon as possible, and then get them to tell me everything.
Truth.
And when I mean everything, I mean everything. Because the only way you can fight a fight is if you know what you're fighting. And 9 times out of 10, they won't tell you everything unless they're cornered. But from experience, I'll say to them, listen, I've heard everything. You can't tell me something I haven't heard. I'm here to help you. You need to tell me everything. And if they do, there's a good chance you can help them. But I've got the lawyers on speed dial. You know, I've got the mental health workers on speed dial. So we can put the support around them. And obviously managing media is so important. So if I know everything, I can work out how to navigate, how to best help them.
I don't want to talk about specific names here, but can you see players now and can you see issues in their life? Can you foresee some of these things we're talking about with those players?
There's a few red lights. Sometimes you can see it in the way they present themselves. One of the big red lights for someone who's going to present a challenge down the track is mobile phone numbers changing constantly. So if they've been through 3 or 4 mobiles, or lose their mobile, or I'll probably lose mine today. But that's generally a sign. So, normal people don't have 2 or 3 or 4 different mobile numbers. So for me, that's something that's not
because they're hanging with the wrong group, or?
Oh, well, the question is, why would you change your mobile number 2 or 3 times? Well, why do you keep losing your mobile? So that's a little thing, but yeah, there's generally signs that you can tell if they're not quite right.
What about recreational drugs? Is that do you think that's big in NRL these days?
Yeah, I do, but I'm not a drugs crusader. I'm certainly anti-drugs, but one of the minute and I've been into the NRL over the years. Laurie Daly and I went in about a dozen years ago and met with the CEO at the time and told them about our concern for drugs and players. And their answer at the time was, we do more testing than anyone. We run better programs than anyone. But it's it. It's easy to say, it's across society, blah, blah, blah. Nick Politis was encouraging earlier this year when he said, I will sack people that...
Anyone gets caught, you're out.
Yeah, it was different, At the same time, I'm not a wowser. We're there to help them and to educate them and make them better people.
Mate, tell me about this big subject, because it's something I've got an opinion on, and we're not here to listen to that. But how do you feel about the NRL's no-fault stand-down policy?
I was frustrated at the time with the
Jack
case. Yeah. We challenged that in court and got beat. I was pretty confident he was going to win at the time. Look, it's very frustrating. There's been a lot of instances where, probably more than less, where people have been stood down and then cleared. Yeah, I understand the game's got to protect the game, but if Jack hadn't had 2 years to run on his contract, he wouldn't have been paid by the club if he was off contract. And, his court case cost over $1 million.
So, you look at somebody like Tristan Saylor, right? So he was out of contract at the Dragons, and a couple of months later he had an indiscretion and then goes to court and,
Look, I'm all for the game protecting its image in that. Remembering that, it's obviously driven greatly by media hype. It might need reviewing. I know the RLPA were keen to challenge it again and hopefully have it reviewed or abolished. I think it's something that we could look at. Yeah.
I think it's run its course. Yeah. If you look at somebody like Jack de Belin, right?
Yeah.
When this happened in 2018, he was at the top of his game, state of origin representative, out of the game for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Peak years.
Yeah.
I know people have got their own opinion, but I truly believe it's it's run its course.
Yeah, at the time it was brought in, there were many indiscretions, and I think the game just said we got to do something. And clubs are getting smarter in relation to repeat offenders, and not in the old days. If you're a good player and you're stuffed up, we'll take you, and then you stuff up there and someone else will take you. I think clubs are getting smarter now and saying we want good people rather than the ones that keep messing up.
Mate, why are agents looked at as the bad guys from everybody out there?
Yeah, it's probably media driven, I think. But I think anyone who works in that type of industry, real estate agents and lawyers and agents are frowned upon. Parking cops are probably the biggest ones. I don't like parking cops. But yeah, look, I don't know. I guess it's because you get a clip of the ticket. That's the industry that you work in. But I really don't know why, because a lot of the people that are critical of the agents don't see some of the work that they do.
You know, there's a big perception that it's the agents who are stirring up all the trouble all the time, and but often it's potentially the player wants to get out too, right? They've just had enough. Yeah,
it's a two-way street, and again,
or the club wants to get them out as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that happens. Probably a lot more than the player wants to get out. So that's club-driven.
Mate, just on this, agent bad guy, Blake Solly a number of years ago said there was a conflict with player agents managing players as well as coaches. We've seen a lot of this recently, with the Manly, everybody's wondering where all that's coming from. How do you feel about that?
Again, mate, I think it's a perception driven by media. I think if a club employs a coach whose agent has numerous players there, or they buy that particular agent's players in, then the club needs their head read. I mean, the buck should stop with the club. The club that invests in a coach whose agent has influence will more than likely finish down the bottom than up the top, in my opinion.
Do you have many coaches?
No, all mine got sacked. Laurie Daly got sacked. Mick Potter got sacked. We were looking after Andrew McFadden. He got sacked. Yeah. Steve Price at the Dragons got sacked. So all mine got sacked, but most of them do. Most of them
eventually.
Get sacked. Yeah. Look, most, if not all, coaches have an agent.
Okay.
And no matter what you do, if you ban agents from representing coaches, they'll still indirectly use an agent. My difficulty with it is if we're going to sack coaches constantly, they're entitled to have someone go and talk to them, read their dismount and how they're going to get paid and all that sort of stuff. But coaches have agents because agents can help find opportunities for them, which is what they need.
There's a bit of talk, when players sign that they have get-out clauses for particular coaches when they leave the club, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I was reading an article from you in 2013 talking about get-out clauses, which were a big part of the game. How do you feel about get-out clauses? Because it's been such a big topic lately.
Yeah, look, I think they'll probably continue to fester at some clubs. If you're a club and you're running last and you can't get a player, you can't attract anyone, and it's a bit like the Luai thing at the Tigers. He said, "Yeah, I'll come, but I want to be sure that I'm on the right horse." Now they had the opportunity to say, "Well, don't come at all unless you're all in," but they didn't because they needed to get him there to prove that he was on the right horse. And I think they'll come out the other side, the Tigers. So when you're scrambling and struggling, sometimes you've got to offer the player the opportunity to make those decisions.
Chimes, I know you can't talk about this particular players too much, right? But give me some examples. I want to ask you about Adam Reynolds, right?
Yeah.
He's a player, was a lot of conjecture about him, leaving the Rabbits, his boyhood club. How do you manage that? I mean, how do you manage your relationship with the Rabbits and Brisbane and the player and, you don't want to put the Rabbits offside. How does that work?
No, look, at the end of the day, it's all business and it is what it is. And there's no point, getting sour grapes and having a whinge and that. Adam's decision to this day, for me, was a head scratcher. I still don't know why the club didn't give him a 2-year deal. But again, that was their decision. So I remember saying to Adam at the time, before he committed to Brisbane, I said, mate, you need to ring the club yourself because you need to hear it for yourself. So give him a ring and say, I'm about to make a decision. Is it only 1 year? And the answer was yes. So then he knew I've got to make a decision. I couldn't have had him doing a deal and then having word get back, we would have done too if they'd done
like
this.
The DCE thing at the moment, right?
So we had to be clear for him to make that move.
Mate, what about, a lot of this stuff plays out in the media, tricks of the trade. You ever use kind of the media for your own good?
Oh, yeah. I use it for good, not evil.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I remember the great Brian Fletcher, who I managed throughout his career.
Good man.
Great man, Fletch. Yeah. He was at South and coming towards the end, and my goal was to get him to England. And I wanted him to go to one of the big clubs because there was really no point going to the poorer clubs because A, there was a chance you weren't going to get paid, and B, they rarely won anything. So I was desperate to get him to Wigan, who at the time were the big dogs in England. So I was ringing Maurice Lindsay constantly saying, mate, you should be taking Fletch. You should be taking Fletch. And I couldn't get him on the hook. He said, oh, no, not at the moment, and all this. And I had to get the deal done. I knew he was going to get a lot of money if I could land him at Wigan. So Steve Sims at the time was running Salford, and he rang me. He said, I've got to come out to Australia for 2 weeks for a family thing. He said, would you have time for a catch-up? I said, would I what? I said, I need you. And he said, what for? I said, well, I'm trying to get Fletch to Wigan. I said, can you come out and say you're interested in him? Now, at the time, Salford were struggling, but they had plans to build this big casino at the ground in the stand, and they were talking about becoming the big dogs in English Rugby League. So I met with Steve and Fletch. We went down to Darling Harbour to the Meat and Wine Company, and I got an outside table and I rang Rothfield. Oh, awesome. And I said, listen, Buzz, I said, I've got a meeting today, a secret meeting with Fletch and Steve Sims, who's come out here to talk to us about getting him over to South. They're building this big casino. They're going to become big players in England. I said, would you be interested in it? He said, would I what? I said, well, send a photographer, mate. I said, so they papped us from across the thing over. So we're sitting there. Anyway, next day, back page of the paper, there's me, Fletch, and Steve Sims, and the headline is, Salford Chase, Aussie star, blah, blah, blah. That night, Maurice Lindsay rings. He said, I want to sign Brian Fletcher. I said, I thought you might. He said, what do we got to do? We did the deal. We did the deal within 24 hours.
Wow.
Off the back of that story.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Mate,
Steve was a good sport. He didn't mind running second. Yeah.
Tell me about the Super League. Pre-COVID, it seemed like, there was a lot of issues here with our salary cap, and it seemed like everybody was going to go to the UK. There was a lot of talk about that. What's happened there? I mean, we know COVID, but are they in trouble over there?
It's struggling. So the clubs are pretty much financially owned. So they're run by the equivalent of a Nick Politis or a Scott Penn. So they're privately owned. They have a very small salary cap, a very small TV deal, extremely loyal fans. To go to games in England's fantastic. The noise that they make, but I'm reasonably confident the NRL will buy the English Super League and develop the game. Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen.
You think it'll be good for them?
Yeah, well, Peter V'landys has ways of making things work.
Very good.
I think if they run it better and can grow it and get more eyes on the game and better TV deals and infrastructure, I think there's something there for sure. We need an international game. If you get in a time machine and come back in 20 years' time, we need something bigger than we have on an international level. We
talk about PVL a lot, right? But I mean, he's been unbelievable for the game. Yeah. He's been phenomenal what he's done. And some people don't like him, but you've got to respect what he's done. It's been phenomenal.
I don't. I think he's fantastic, and I rarely hear anyone be critical of him.
People call him a bully.
Yeah, there's a lot of fans out there, and everyone's got an opinion. That's the beautiful thing about Rugby League, and we encourage them to share their thoughts. But I think we're lucky to have him. Yeah.
Mate, what's the money like in Super League? Just last bit on that. I mean, compared to Australia.
Yeah, look, a good contract over there. They have marquee contracts where you can pay the players over £175,000, pretty much whatever you want.
Right.
But obviously there's a limit to what they'll go. But a good contract over there in Aussie dollars, a good contract would be about 280 to 300k.
Aussie?
Yeah, equivalent of, yeah.
Oh, so not a lot.
No.
So you're only going there as your last resort.
Mate, there's not too many players in England there for any other reason other than they couldn't get a start here.
Yeah. How do you tap somebody on the shoulder? I mean, obviously the clubs do, but
yeah.
I mean, it's a big decision to go over there, right? For a young guy.
It's refreshing when a player comes to you and says, look, I'm getting towards the end. I don't have any kids. My missus and I would really like to go and explore and do something different. That's an easy sell to an English club. Whereas an English club's chasing an Origin play, he's not going to play in England. So when they want to go, it's so much easier. But as I said, mate, the majority of them go because opportunities in Australia are drying up or have dried up for them.
Mate, you've had a great go. What's the next few years for you? Player management,
mate. Plan is to keep going.
Yeah.
Working with Clinton Schifosky. I managed Clinton his entire career, and he works with me now. He's fantastic, and he's got great enthusiasm. He's a bit younger than me, so he's got the fresh legs. He can run a bit faster than me. But plan is to keep going, mate, and continue to enjoy it and work hard. For at least another 5 years.
At least for expansion, right? Got to stick around for that.
Yeah, but expansion. New Guinea, I want to see if we can get a crack at the tax-free money.
How do you think that'll go, Papua New Guinea?
Look, it's going to be an enormous challenge getting the players there, getting the right players there, building a roster.
Any players you can think of? Oh, you mentioned them before.
Oh, yeah, look, Alex Johnson will be on the hit list. Hopefully Jack DeBellin, he'll be 97, but hopefully he can still go.
Strap him up.
Look, they'll be interested in Xavier Coates. They'll be interested in guys with heritage. But it will be very tough to get a roster together,
mate. When you approach young kids, what's your sell to them?
Oh, mate, it's like an interview type thing. So you sit down with their parents and meet them for the first time, and we explain the advantage of having an agent and what we think we do for them. But at the same time, we assess what they're like. So look at the kids' work ethic and manners and stuff like that, how they hold themselves in that meeting. And obviously from a parental point of view, we look for parents that are measured and calm and realistic and sensible and not off the charts in relation to, my boy's going to be a superstar, what can you do for him? I'd rather say to them, look, we can help open doors for your son, but we can also help make him a better person as well.
And so, when you look at those kids, aside from talent, I mean, talent's the number one thing, right? But what are the other couple of things that you look for? How does that decide who's your top 300
when identify
player?
them?
Yeah.
I mean, you look for things that a lot of kids can't do. So I look for if a kid can run the length, he's got something going for him. I look for the kid that might get hurt and he might get cut, but he'll get up and want to play on. So he's courageous. So you look for little things. You look for size and shape and how they're going to grow and what they're going to look like in 5 years' time. So you forecast what they're like, and obviously leg speed and all that sort of stuff. So you look at the athlete, but you also look at the character of the athlete.
Mate, you're a big proponent of the women's game or the women's games. How do you see that in the next 5 years?
Look, we manage a few of the elite girls, and they're great to deal with. It's not going away, the women's game. In the not too distant future, every NRL team will have a women's team. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen. Women's Origin is great to watch. They're so talented. We watch the Aussies towel up Great Britain in Vegas.
Unbelievable.
They're so good, and it's going to get better because we've got all these young girls playing touch and Oztag now, so the skill set will just keep getting better and better and better. Very
good, mate. When we started first talking about this, I spoke to a lot of people, and I couldn't believe how many people were complimentary of you as a legend of the game and as a gentleman. So, it was quite interesting, in the early days. So, mate, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I'm glad we got to turn the table so everybody can learn about your time.
Thanks,
and
mate. Thanks
for
having me.
joining me on Chiming In.
Good on you, Oz.
Cheers.
Ta.